Welcome back. I hope you all had a lovely lunch. Your bellies are full. You're ready to hear some more lovely information from our speakers. Also, just for anyone who took part in the live drawing of the lunch break, it'd be great if you could share your images and, just make sure to tag or mention the convention. It'll be cool to see all the work everyone made. But yeah, without any further time wasting, let's hear from our next speaker, Jad Saber, on designing with light and shapes. Let's give him a warm welcome, everyone. Come on.
Thank you guys. It's a pleasure to be here. And before I start, I would just like to thank Gabriel for inviting me to this event. It's a pleasure to be here in Slovakia and to talk to you guys and to have this lecture. So as you may already know, my name is Jad Saber and I'm a concept artist, and I've been working in this industry for about 10 years. And I've put here some of the, along these 10 years, I had the opportunity to work on a lot of interesting projects. And I've put up here the three that I guess marked me the most in terms of career path and in terms of just, fun projects, learning experiences. And those are Black Adam, the recently released DC Comics movie on which I worked with the Pitch Dev studio team, with Paul Chadesson, Timothy Rodriguez, and David Levy. And The Last of Us Part 2, on which I've worked with the One Pixel Brush team at the time with my friend Balash, who's sitting right here. That was a great experience as well. We worked on this game for like 4 or 5 years, if I remember correctly, developing, all the look, the concept art of the game. Mainly on environments. We do environments, so we work on the lighting, on the layout of the environment, and we do keyframes as well, cinematic keyframes. And Uncharted Lost Legacy, same thing. So just, I've put up some of my personal work here for people who don't know me, to just show off a little bit what I usually do in images, what I like to do in image making, which is basically working the composition, the lighting, the storytelling. These are the elements that I enjoy doing, and this will be reflected in my work. You can see that there's a lot of 3D, use of photos, and painting as well on top to do some touch-ups, and we can talk about this process a little bit more at a later stage. So here's another keyframe that I did. And using my Blender workflow. And sometimes I also like to do more stylized image. This is kind of a Zelda fan art, for which I didn't use any 3D, but I just like sometimes to test myself and experiment with different techniques. And it just goes to say that once you know what you're doing and you've been at it for a while and you spend the time to learn these things properly, whether you're using 3D or you're just using photos or you're just painting, at the end of the day, you're gonna get the results that you want, because it's really all about experience and knowing what to decide and where. Should I put this tree here? Should I use this type of lighting for this image? What kind of story do I want to convey? So all these things come into play, and whatever tool you're using, whether it's a very realistic image such as this one, which I did for the Last of Us Part 2, or if it's a more stylized image, you're using the same the same notions of composition, of lighting, and of image making, to put it short. So nowadays, I'm working with Chromatic Studio, which is a studio that I founded with my partner, Timothy Rodriguez. We founded the studio 1 year ago, and my work has changed a bit because I'm still producing images from time to time, to help out our artists. We've grown really quickly, actually. We're now 20 people in the studio. And we're getting some really amazing clients to work with, like Naughty Dog and Epic Games, HBO. We've just signed with them. So my work has really shifted from actually doing images most of the time to more art directing and more managing the company, of course, but I'm still very much involved into these projects, especially our biggest projects, in art direction and helping out the artists and briefing, coming up with briefs for the artists so that we can work together to produce the best outcome possible, which is something I learned while working on The Last of Us 2, which is probably my favorite project that I've worked on because it's a passion project. It's a game that I've always liked, the first Last of Us. And I was really stoked to work on The Last of Us Part 2. And I remember when working on this project, we were working as a team with, I think we were like 10 people maybe at some point, but there was a core team of 4 or 5 people. And we were helping each other out, we were giving each other feedback. We had like a friendly competition with the guys from Naughty Dog as well, who were really good. Eitan Zana, Aaron Limonic, John Sweeney, all those guys. And this really helped us push the quality. And it was fun to work as a team. Like, this is the best working experience I've had in my life. And this is why I try to reproduce this in my own company now. We try to create teams on different projects and have a good team spirit and talk to each other, give each other feedback. Because even though we're remote for now, we're planning to open up a studio in Berlin, but we are still remote for now. It really helps to communicate and to talk to each other and to push the standards really high. So I always like to show, before I get into the lecture and the presentation, about designing with lights and shapes, right? This is the title of my presentation. And I hope that it will be helpful to some of you guys. I don't know, how many of you guys, by the way, are professionals here, like already working in the industry? All right, and I guess all the rest are students. How many are students or aspiring concept artists? Okay, good to know. I just like to ask this question to kind of see how to cater my talk and what to talk about and what not. So I always like to show this early work because it just proves that we all come from, nothing to begin with. And it's not, there's always this debate about talent, or does it exist? Are some people more talented than others? I really don't believe in that. I think people who are more talented than others are just people who were exposed at a younger age to maybe different elements that made it in a way that when they were growing up, they had maybe more privilege or more opportunities to see different things, and it made them kind of talented. But I think if you put in the work, you will absolutely get there. Some people takes more time, some people takes less time. So I'm just showing, this is by the way, when I first got my tablet, my Wacom tablet. I think it was in 2010, maybe 2009. I had just finished my business degree, and I decided that I wanted to do art for a living because I didn't want to work at a bank my whole life. At the time I had, done a small internship in a bank. So I grabbed my tablet, I started drawing, and this is the shitty result that I got at the time. And then I found a school, an online school. Back in the day, it was in the States. And this school was a good starting point for me because it made me learn about values, about perspective, about a bunch of different notions that I had no clue about at the time. And here you can see just some example of the assignments that I used to do at that school. And I was really taking baby steps, learning about light, how it applies to form, perspective, anatomy, did some oil paintings back in the day. And still, with this school, you can see a little bit of progress from what I showed you first and this step here after I learned some of the foundations. So after that, I tried really hard to get a job in the industry, but because I'm Lebanese originally, and I was in Lebanon back then, the industry is non-existent. So all I could do in the meantime is to get some storyboard jobs for commercials. So I did these storyboards, and it was a good way for me to get some money, and at the same time, it allowed me to progress and to work on my drawing skills. It wasn't like a well-paid job, but it got me through these days. And I was always thinking, like, what kind of job can I do to actually still improve my drawing, all the while making a little bit of money? And then I discovered 3D. So I started applying to Ubisoft and all these companies outside of Lebanon. And I noticed that something that I was missing in my skill set was the 3D, right? Because at the time, 3D was slowly getting into the concept art industry. And it was starting to become like a requirement because it helps you so much with the perspective and with the light and all these things. So if you look at this image here, I made the base with Google SketchUp at the time. It was a very basic 3D. I didn't know how to light or anything, but just laying these objects in 3D allowed me to project myself into the space. It eliminated completely the problem of perspective at the time for me. And it allowed me to be able to design in a better way. This image still has a lot of issues. Like if you look at the focal points, there is no shape language here. It's just a bunch of scribbles. But this is one of the, I included this one because for me it was one of the first images that kind of allowed me to jump from what I showed you before to here. And this image here is one of my oldest images. After SketchUp, I jumped to KeyShot and to 3D Code after seeing all the JAMA tutorials. And that was also a level up for me. And it's because of this image that I was able to get my job with Shadi from One Pixel Brush, where we've worked on The Last of Us 2 and Uncharted and all these cool projects. So this was a turning point for me because I showed this to Shadi and he's like, this is awesome and I can give you work, right? So after that, I started working with Shadi and it was hard because I did this image, right? And this image was good, but it takes more experience. Like when you're doing personal work, it's a bit easier because you can do whatever you want, right? If this thing is not working here, I can replace it with something else. If you don't have constraints, basically, like when you're working with a client, you don't have a specific lighting, a specific framing, you can do whatever you want. So as soon as I started working with Shadi on big titles like Last of Us and stuff like that, I was really, it made me come back to reality, and I realized that maybe I wasn't good enough. And it was a very stressful period for a couple of months. But then I was working with some really amazing artists who really helped me, and they helped me see a lot of things. They taught me like matte painting techniques, a lot of techniques related to working with photos, which we needed for realistic games. And I wasn't sleeping for like 2 months. I was working my ass off, but it paid off, right? 2 months down the line, it was starting to get easier for me. And then, of course, it's always challenging. Every image, if you want to push it to the maximum, is challenging. But for me, just working in this environment with friendly yet really good artists allowed me to push myself. And here I am today with my own company and helping other people as well to push their skills and to get the best out of the concept art experience. So my lecture today is going to be about designing with shapes and lights, and I've divided it into 5 parts. The first one is laying the foundations, learning from the master, the importance of reference, understanding design, and designing with light, which for me are all requirements to do at least the kind of image that I'm doing, right? So everything that I will say in this lecture is really my own way of viewing things and my own beliefs. Some people, some other artists may disagree or may have different views. So I just wanted to note that before we get started. The first part, I'm sure you've heard it before, you've heard it many times, and you will hear it again and again, is about the foundations or the fundamentals. And a lot of portfolios that we see today of artists, that want to work with us, or artists in general on ArtStation, are very good they have good 3D skills, good technical understanding of how 3D softwares work, but it can still be very obvious in their work that they don't know their foundations really well. And for me, nothing can be properly built without solid foundations. And I've illustrated it here with some skeletons of a human being, of a boat, of a building, right? You cannot build what's on top before you build what's underneath first. And this is not a joke. This is something that needs to be, you need to spend the time. There is no way around it. It's not like a technical software that you can learn in 1 week or in 2 weeks. This is the thing that requires 2, 3, maybe 4 years to actually, I wouldn't say master because you don't have to master it, and to master it, it would take, I haven't mastered it. You just have to know these things well enough to get to a decent level, right? So that you can actually focus on design. Because what we're doing as commercial artists, we are designing for clients, we are designing for companies, video game companies, movies. And in order to be able to design and to, free yourself from all these constraints, you have to master these foundations. This is why I've put this on top of these columns. And these columns here once you have them, color theory, light and form, perspective, composition, these will carry this design thing and will allow you to design freely. Because if you're struggling with the perspective, if you're struggling with the composition, then your design is never going to work. There's no way you can make a good design if your light is off, if your perspective is off, if your composition. These are really, for me, the fundamentals of design. So speed painting, it's a trap. Why am I saying that? Because I know a lot of people, I guess it's a bit less relevant today, but I remember when we were learning concept art, there was a lot of groups on Facebook for speed paintings and people wanting to show that they can paint something really fast, and students try to focus on speed. Not to say that speed is not important, but when you are learning something, you don't want it to, end up looking like this, right? If you're doing a cake and you bake it in 10 minutes, or you try to just put some stuff together without putting the proper thought, especially when you're learning, right? You have to take your time. You have to think about everything. Why is this way? Why is this detail? You look at someone whose work, someone that you respect, someone whose work you really love, and you try to understand slowly but surely why do things work the way they do. If you don't understand how things work, then how can you just do speed painting, right? So take the time to learn. Progress doesn't happen overnight. You have to really compare yourself to last year. Where am I now? Where was I last year? I did this much progress by drawing every day. Okay, that's great. That's motivating. I can keep going, right? Don't compare. You can compare yourself to other artists in the sense that if you respect the artist and you look up to him, you can actually compare yourself to him to know what's wrong with your art. But the most important thing is that keeps you going, at least that kept me going back in the day, is to look at my old work and make sure that, all right, last year I was here and now I'm there. I'm doing good. Let's keep pushing. So tools are great when you have the knowledge. And I have a bunch of images of JAMA. Who knows JAMA in this room? All right, not a lot of people. If you want to be a concept artist, then you need to know JAMA, you need to know Jamie Jones, you need to know Paul Chadesson, you need to know Craig Mullins. So, guys, get your research done. These are like some of the best artists in the world. JAMA, why am I putting his work here? Because he's an amazing artist who's also done a lot of tutorials, and he uses a wide variety of different tools like VR, like 3D code, different softwares, Blender add-ons he's developing. And I just wanted to show that the guy, because everybody thinks that if I use this tool, then I'm going to do great artwork. If I use VR, that's the key. I'm going to become a good artist. No. This guy, back in the day, this is in 2010, so like 12 years ago, he already knew his fundamentals, right? He could draw perfectly. He could compose. This is a beautiful composition, even though it's like, not a finished image. You can already see that it's working very well. There's the focal point here. There's the 2/3, 1/3 here. So it's, the 2/3, 1/3 is a rule of design, right? It's always more interesting when you have a composition, to take 2/3 and then 1/3 here, or maybe, 3/4 and 1/4, rather than dividing it in the middle, which creates a conflict between the two parts of the image. So JAMA already knew these things, and if you want to be successful, before thinking about what tool you're using, think about working your fundamentals. Learning from the masters. Observe, analyze, study, and steal cleverly, because we're stealing a lot as concept artists, right? As artists in general, whether you're working in the music industry or in the... Oh, so what happened here? I think my mic was half working, but now it's working a bit better. Need to get it closer to my mouth. I don't know. Anyways, are you guys, can you hear me okay, I guess? Yeah, perfect. All right, let's keep going then. So, yeah, steal cleverly, right? Because we're all building on top of each other's work, and I'll get to that in a minute. So the way I do painting studies is an exercise that you do to learn about brush marks, to learn about composition, to learn about color. So this is something I learned from John Park back in the day, where he would find a reference of a photo and then find another reference of a master painting, right? Like a painter that you admire that does a really good job at it. and then kind of combine both. So if you see in my study here that I did, I studied this photo, but I also used the colors from this painter to try to understand why he's using this color here and why he's using this color there, and try to make something out of it. Also, to carefully study his brush marks, because in a photo, basically when you're painting from a photo, you need to synthesize, right? You need to observe the shapes, and with your pen or with your brush, you need to synthesize those shapes to make them your own. Otherwise, what's the point, right? You could just show a photo and that's it. So in order to learn how to synthesize with my brushstrokes, I looked a lot at the reference from Josh Clare here. So just wanted to show you a good way of studying. Because when you're studying images, you're not just blatantly copying for the sake of copying, right? You want to learn something from it. And in that sense, I included some people that I admire and that I think are modern day masters that you can look at, like Jamie Jones here. And there's Florent Lebrun, one of my friends who's also one of my favorite artists. And Paul Chadesson, also an amazing designer, also a very good friend. So these guys are the best in the world at what they're doing, right? So you need to note them down. You need to know who they are. You need to, if ever you want to do, spaceship design or hard surface design, you need to know who Paul Chadesson is, and you need to look at his work carefully and try to understand why he's so good, right? Because he's already been through the steps to get there. So in order for you to figure it out, instead of doing it by yourself, why don't we look at those guys and try to figure out how they did it, right? Maybe they have some tutorials, maybe they don't. Maybe we can just observe their work. Maybe someday you'll get to meet them in a workshop and ask them a few questions, right? But for me, it was important to have like these kind of role models. And this little image here, I've included it to say that we build upon the work of our predecessors. And this is something that is all around us. Even in science, the discoveries that are made, the breakthrough discoveries are not made all of a sudden, right? It's not just like the guy woke up and he discovered something amazing. He's building on the work of the people who came before him, and he's gonna add something small to it, right? But the small thing, maybe because he was able to analyze and to group all the information that he had, it made a breakthrough in science, and now we have something amazing. So it's the same thing for art and image making, right? You can actually look at what's before you. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you do an image. That's not your job, especially not as a commercial artist working for a client, right? You need to find your own reference. You need to find the people who did it before you. If I want to do a spaceship, I'm probably going to look at Paul Chadesson's spaceships. I'm not saying I need to copy what he did exactly, but maybe I can really draw a lot of good information. Maybe I can look at how all of this blue part is simple, and then he has his complexity in this part, right? And in this part. So this is like the 2/3, 1/3 rule, right? The 2/3 is more simple and the 1/3 is more complex. This makes the design classy instead of having details everywhere. And we'll come back to that in a bit as well. I'm just trying to keep track of time. I think we're doing good. So the importance of reference, inspiration, learning, and decision making. So the importance of reference. The reference, I have a saying that I always say. It's an artist, or a designer rather, because who can define what an artist is, right? Picasso is an artist, but I don't know. Let's not get into Picasso right now. Picasso's art. An artist is only as good as his reference. Why? Because when you're designing something, if you have the technical skills to actually build something in 3D or to reproduce something that you're seeing, what's really going to make the difference is were you able to find the right reference or not, right? Because if you have a bad reference and you will build your work on this bad reference, your work, even if you spend the whole week, is going to be shit, right? But if you find the right reference, and the reference is so relevant to what you're doing and to what your client is asking, and you're able to execute it perfectly because you spent the time to learn the 3D softwares, you spent the time to learn your fundamentals, then your work is 100% going to be great, right? So it's all about finding the right reference. And I have some proof for you here. This is Jamie Jones' work, right? And on the right, it's his reference. And can you see how close the final image is to the reference? It's pretty close, right? He took the composition, he added these pipes, but he took the whole layout of this photo. So I'm writing there, it can get you there 70% of the way. Oftentimes it can, sometimes it can get you 80%, sometimes 50%, but you should strive to get a reference that gets you the furthest possible in your process, because the problem is solved, right? Let's look at another one. Again, this is pretty close, right? He added, obviously, the storytelling elements. Maybe he probably got other references for that. He didn't do it from his head. He got other references for the poses. And he used the mood of this image and the color palette, some purples, the greens, the overall purple grading, and the vertical trees to create his composition, right? You have vertical elements, and then here in the middle you have a huge spider, which is organic, so obviously it's breaking all this verticality and creating a nice focal point. And then you have, foreground elements and midground soldiers standing there. He's looking at the spider, his knife is pointing here, and his spear is pointing towards the spider, so all of this will help the composition, right? It's all conscious decisions that will help your composition. Jamie Jones, again, another reference. He's looking a lot at the old masters, the old painters. He has a lot of references from them, and he uses them to... and this is what I mean by steal cleverly, right? These people have done their paintings a long time ago, a very long time ago. And people have forgotten about a lot of these paintings, which doesn't mean you have to steal the same thing and say that you did it. No, that's fraud, right? We're not going to do that. But what if we steal like a bit of the background? What if we look at the brushstrokes and try to kind of imitate or mimic these brushstrokes to get a certain result that we're looking for? Same thing for this one. It's the exact same composition, and the subject is different, right? He made it more sci-fi with this kind of gas mask or whatever helmet this guy's wearing, and he has a spear. In this one, he doesn't. So there's no copyright on composition, right? Composition is abstract. It's just a grouping of shapes. It's just a way to lay out your shapes and your lighting. So in this case, Jamie here really did a smart move of stealing this abstract composition and make his own image out of it. Same one here. Look how obvious the reference is. And I remember when these things came out on the internet, everybody was like, oh shit, Jamie is stealing reference and everything, Just like when Photoshop came out and everybody was going crazy, you people are cheaters, you're using photos, and this is not real painting. But at the end of the day, when you look at this, he's not a cheater, he's a fucking genius, right? He's just taking what he can take, but making it his own because he changed the subject matter. Especially if it's a really old painting, right? It's not like, so if you do this, like if this was the work of, I don't know, my friend Balazs, right? And I just do this and I post it, like that's super shitty, right? He just did it 1 month ago and now I'm doing the same thing. But these are really old paintings. So this is where when I say steal cleverly, this is where you can actually do something like that. In this particular case, also, you can see the influence, the bed. He took this pose from this lady, and then he changed his lighting to fit his image and his storytelling. More references, this time from Ruan Jia. He's a Chinese artist, also very famous in the industry. You can clearly see the reference that he used and how much he took from it. And now, same thing applies for design. This is Doug Chang, and he has a very interesting talk on YouTube that you can find. And for those of you who don't know, Doug Chang is a production designer now, I think, for Mandalorian, but he used to be an art director and a concept artist who worked on a lot of the Star Wars movies. And in his talk on YouTube that you should definitely check out, he's talking about his process and the references that he uses. And look at how close this is to this, right? It's exactly the same shape. What we've added to it are the wings on both sides and these antennas here, and you're done. So this is the perfect example of your design is as good as your reference. Same thing here. I mean, I don't know what to say about this one. It's exactly this. I guess he made that wider, that part, right? But super close inspiration. This thing is a lamp, I think, a street lamp. and he used it to make a spaceship out of it. Now, of course, some things come into play here. It's not enough to just grab this and make it into a spaceship. You need to have a basic understanding of your subject. If you're going into cars or into spaceships, what are the components of a spaceship, right? It has thrusters, it has maybe wings, it has an engine. What kind of engine does it have? Propulsors, you know, all these things you need to think about. Is it a turbine engine or not? It has a cockpit, right? Because we need to sit on it. So where do I place the cockpit? And all these things have to come into play. But then you combine your knowledge with a reference, with a visual reference that would give you a good shape, and you will have your design. So this image here is just an example of, because I have a lot of, you know, I give classes sometimes in Paris at New Edge School. And a lot of the students, when they go looking for reference, they will go on the internet and they will just start looking for reference, and they will find the most random shit on the internet. And it's important, this is why I was giving you the names of these artists before, because you need to know who you're looking at. You can't just, like, you know, with all my respect to Rajesh Lati, hopefully he's not in the room with us today. This is bad design, right? Why is it bad design? Because it doesn't have this classiness that we were talking about, this 2/3, 1/3. It's busy everywhere, right? There's no place for the eye to rest. Some things, I don't know what, like, I don't understand what this is, right? Is it a cannon maybe to shoot stuff? Is it, I'm not sure what it is. The perspective is even off, because we have this wing here, and if I look at it, you know, this other wing should actually be visible on this side, but it's not. So it has a lot of issues, right? And then if you look at something like that, which was made by John Wallen Liberto, I think I don't have the complete full screen for some reason, but that's fine. And then you can understand that there's a huge difference, right? The complexity is concentrated in this area, and then all of this is more simple. And then by looking at this, I can kind of understand what the function of the spaceship is, right? It has these big tanks here, so maybe they're filled with fuel, maybe it's transporting some sort of liquid. So it's a tanker spaceship, right? So whenever I can look at something and understand what it is, it means that it's a good design. I understand the purpose of this vehicle, of this spaceship here. It has those thrusters here to, you know, for maneuverability, so that it can rotate like this and like this. And it has just such a classiness of design and of color, you know, it's perfectly balanced. The values, those are dark values here and there, and then you have the light value where the cockpit is. So this is good design, and this is why you should know where you're looking, what references to look for. Same thing for this example here. This is from The Witcher, right, the series. And I wrote down here that movies, CG, and concept art are made by people of all skill levels, just to say that doesn't necessarily mean, if you're looking at The Witcher, which is a very acclaimed show, it has a lot of budget, right? Doesn't mean that all the shots are going to be amazing. This shot here is really bad because it has so much bleeding from the light. It looks so unnatural, even the grading, the greens are really weird, you know, the orange. It doesn't look natural, whereas if I look at this one in comparison, I just took two forest one. This one is from Blade Runner 2049. The director of photography was Roger Deakins. It's just a natural shot, and it's a very simple shot, but it works really well, you know, natural lighting with natural colors. And this is something you could look at. Now, it's not the best, most interesting storytelling in this particular shot, but I just wanted to show you that the contrast of having artificial, bad-looking lighting that is bleeding all over the place and lighting that works. So understanding design, number 4, shape, function, and taste. Shape design. Understanding the big, medium, small. So the big, medium, small is another principle. Just like the 2/3 and 1/3, we also have this principle that is very important to keep in mind. And how do you apply it to design? And you will see that you actually apply it everywhere. It's even applied in nature all around you, which is, you know, the golden mean, the Fibonacci sequence. This actually applies, and I will tell you how. This is an image from Eitan Zana, right? And if I go, I kind of drew some lines just to help you guys see that, first of all, you have the big shapes that will constitute the composition, right? This is a big shape here. we have a big shape in the middle and a big shape on the left. And those are the level 1 shapes. I'm calling them in this example. If I dig further into the image, I'm gonna use this blue line to circle the medium shapes, which in this case are the level 2 shapes, right? We have one light shape here, we have one here, one there. And then this one could also be considered a medium shape. And then if you look even further inside those medium shapes, you have some smaller shapes. Those are the level 3 shapes. And every step of the way, Eitan is actually thinking about these shapes, right? When he places his photos or when he paints over, he's going to look at the shapes and take a conscious decisions if these shapes are working or not, if they're helping, if he's abiding by this big, medium, small rule or not, if the shapes are actually pointing towards the right direction or not, right? If you look at these shapes here, all these dark shapes are actually making, kind of arrows that are pointing towards our characters here for the storytelling. So this is how this big, medium, small, and this Fibonacci sequence work. It's, the Fibonacci sequence, you have a square, you have a rectangle, and then it's divided into big, medium, and small, and then inside each one, it repeats and repeats and repeats infinitely. And this is how it applies to image making, right? Within the shapes, you have other shapes, and then within those shapes, you still have smaller shapes up to a point where you get to the textures, right? The tiny shapes. So now, of course, we're not gonna go zoom in and do like a 20K pixel image to think about every tiny texture, but you get the point. All right, so speed and efficiency are two requirements that are dictated by the industry. And I say that because we need, as commercial artists, to embrace every new software that comes our way. If we have to solve problems for a client, if I need to design a character with folds, really realistic folds, do I need to use Marvelous Designer? Or because, I can maybe try to do them with photos, maybe it might take me 3 more days instead of just learning, maybe not an entire software, but just part of a software that allows me to do a specific task, and this will help me solve my problem, right? And in the future, when I get faced with a similar task, I can reuse the same part of the software to solve the specific task. So I included some of the softwares that I use here. First of all, Blender is the most important one. Why? Because Blender is a software that regroups everything from layout to lighting to modeling. All of you can even animate in Blender. I mean, I don't do much animation unless I want to show like a specific thing to a client, simple animation. But just to say that these softwares, Blender is comparable to Maya or 3ds Max. These softwares they have the whole package. You can do something from A to Z using Blender. And then 3D Code for modeling, organic stuff. Octane, I'm not using it that much anymore, but it's a great render engine. DAZ 3D just allows you to pose characters. It's a super easy software. It doesn't take anything to learn, maybe 10 minutes just to get around the interface. It helps you pose a character, and then you can use that character to put in your scene, to maybe as a base for a character design, or maybe to sculpt on top, whatever you want. Marvelous Designer for the clothes, World Creator, TerraGen, those can create landscapes very quickly. If you need a 3D landscape that looks realistic, some desert dunes, some mountains, some canyons. Quixel Bridge is a very useful tool to get materials and textures and 3D assets as well. They have a lot of scans today, and they're growing and growing, and you probably know this, but Epic Games actually bought Quixel, and they keep on improving. And they have a bridge that can link it to Blender or to whatever software you're using. So you can directly go to the bridge and get the material and import it into Blender. And then I included AI here because I won't be going deeply into this AI subject, but I just thought to include it here because, again, we're saying that we need to stay on top of the game and to embrace change. So this debate of whether AI is good or not is complete bullshit for me because it's not our place to decide, right? The industry doesn't care about what you think. They just care about what work can you produce. So if it's there and if it's today it started to get, you have Blender plugins for AI. They're just very fresh and very new. We're not using them that much yet in the industry. But very soon, I think we will. You have an AI plugin for Photoshop. I don't know if you've seen that video, but you can just type in something or import an image from Van Gogh or from whoever, and then it will generate compositions based on this image. And then it's directly in Photoshop. So if you need to paint over it or do something, you can do this directly. So the AI plugins or the AI softwares or whatever is going to happen with AI is going to be introduced to our workflow at some point. So either you can be like those guys who were like, no, Photoshop is cheating and we don't want that. Using photos is cheating and we don't want that. And some 12-year-old kid would learn it and will get your job. Or you can just embrace it and move forward with your life. And if you're doing a low-level job like like retopology or something like that, I remember we talked about that with Andrew Price on the podcast. Retopology is when you take like a complex 3D model that has a lot of polys and you need to make it game ready or have it, less polys. This is the kind of job that eventually got replaced by machines. So if you're doing this kind of job or you're just drawing something simple, like a skull or an anatomy drawing to be put in a book, then AI will replace you. But otherwise, it won't. It just will be part of the process. You have to use it and introduce it to your process. Extrinsic, I don't know if I'll have enough time, but gonna try to go faster. Extrinsic versus intrinsic design. What does that mean, right? Extrinsic design is when you start with a silhouette and the thumbnail without actually thinking about what you're designing, right? The client says, like, I want a spaceship that looks cool. And you're like, oh, okay, let's draw something cool. But what the hell are you actually drawing, right? So I have a bunch of spaceships that I did back in the day without actually giving thought to what I was doing. And that really affects your design because the other way of designing, instead of just ending up with some random cool shapes, but a random functionality for the design, the other way of doing it is the intrinsic design, where you actually think about what you're designing first and why would it look the way that it's going to look. So designing from the inside out, in-depth research and understanding of the design subject. And you can do mind mapping for that. Mike Hill has a very interesting video about, it's an old video. He's not doing content anymore like that. But it was so interesting for me because he really breaks down his process of just writing down the core of his design, right? It's a control tower. So it has, return deck, elevator. So if it has an elevator, then, maybe there's a storage or jet fighters. Like everything leads to something. Actually, in this one, he was trying to, I think, to just map out the gameplay of the interior of a spaceship that he did for, I don't remember what game it was. So every time you write something, it might lead to something else. If you're designing an engine, if your spaceship has an engine, what kind of engine is it, right? What kind of energy? Is it thrust energy or, some kind of different lift energy or whatever? And this will lead to places for you to think about what elements would make sense to include in your design. These questions that you need to ask yourself, what, why, how, where, who, every question that you can ask yourself, do it. Because these vehicles, if you want your design to be credible, then it needs to follow the function. Form follows function. This Formula One car, its whole purpose is to be aerodynamic and super fast. So if you look at it from the top, it literally looks like an arrow almost. It's super aerodynamic. The wind will come from here. It will pass through the shapes. It will go through the spoiler to maximize the velocity of the car. This one is used for transportation of goods. So obviously, it has like a big ass back where you can put in some containers. And this one is an airport tug vehicle, right? It's U-shaped, and its sole purpose is to come plug itself into the wheel of the plane to move it. And it looks pretty cool. Why does it look cool? Because it serves a function, a specific function, and it's designed from the outside to serve what it actually does from the inside. And this is intrinsic design, right? Another example with this castle I like to give is that this looks like that because it has a certain function, right? We have a king in the keep, and this is the furthest point away from the invaders. When they come, they will go through the village, and then there's the moat, there's the water, there's the wall protecting the castle. Once they get into the castle, they need to climb. This is very tough to climb. And then you have The drawbridge also, the function of it is to protect the castle, so the people cannot, the invaders cannot actually enter the castle from this place. The towers are used for defense, right? You have these very small windows so that the arrows from the outside cannot actually get in the towers easily, but if you're inside, you can actually fire arrows through these very tight windows, so this serves a purpose. Same thing for all these ramparts. And the keep is really the highest point because this is where we want to defend the king inside of the castle. So the function of this castle made it so it looks this way, right? And obviously it's made out of stone for it to be sturdy, and it's not made out of wood or out of something that could be destroyed easily. Just to say that everything has a purpose. So develop your design sensibility, travel around the world. Now I know, of course, as a student, I really wasn't able to travel around the world because I couldn't afford it, but step by step, start making money, part-time job, storyboards, whatever. Bit by bit, I was able to actually afford to travel. And ever since I started living in Paris like 7 years ago, it became much easier for me because Europe is a place where you can actually travel around a lot. You have trains, you can easily get around. And this is important because it builds your visual library and it builds your taste when you see beautiful things. Same thing for the movies that you watch, the games that you play, right? Those are also important because if you're only watching Marvel movies all the time and they're lit like shit, you're not going to get anywhere, right? You need to try to watch the right movies, the right references, and this will help you build your personality, your artistic personality, I would say, and your taste, because you can be very good technically and learn all the 3D and all the fundamentals, the foundations, but if you don't have any taste because you haven't seen the cool stuff that was made out there, the best things ever, Akira, a lot of movies and games like, Cyberpunk, Blade Runner, I don't know. A lot of people draw inspiration from, I'm not sure if Blade Runner did that, but I know a lot of IPs actually draw inspiration from this comic right here. So Dune, Brandon Sanderson, The Way of Kings, including some of my favorite books here. Master Shots, this one is not a novel or like a storybook, but it's more about technical framing and how to move the camera when doing keyframes, if you're doing action scenes, if you're doing running scenes, all kinds of different things. And I think it was John Sweeney who actually recommended it. So the last chapter, designing with light, because a composition is a mix of shapes and lights. They go together because if you have shapes but you have no light to shine on those shapes that you can actually see the shapes, it's going to be pitch black. So light and shapes, for me, they come together, and this is why I call this talk Designing with Light and Shapes. Notan is a Japanese term that signifies light, dark, harmony. And basically, it's the play of lights and darks, right? And this is what a composition is. This is what an image is. This is how your eyes function when you see something in front of you. It's a mix of lights and darks. So this is the core of composition making, this play of whites and darks. I mean, whites, it's more like lights and darks. Application to a representational painting. This is a painting by Arthur Streeton, and when you look at it like that, it has a lot of information, a lot of paint strokes. It looks beautiful, but if you strip it down to its core, this is what it looks like. And it's tonal striping. You have a dark shape, a light shape, a dark shape, and then a light shape again. And then on this light shape, you have something that we call counter change, which is putting a dark shape in front of a light shape to make it stand out and create a focal point, right? We use counter change in painting to attract the attention of the viewer. Another application, so this is a painting by Jean-Léon Gérôme, a French academic painter. Again, it has a lot of information, but if you break it down to its core, you have a light shape down there, a dark shape in the middle, and you have this gladiator who has light on him to create counter change and be silhouetted by the dark shape that's behind him. And then you have those shapes of these people that are all pointing, saying like, let's kill this fucker. And they have these arrows what they really are doing is they're visually transporting our eyes from this point to this guy, right? They're creating these arrows, which is a very helpful compositional tool. Even the use of color, so I haven't talked about it here, but even this thing, like, it's so much more saturated, and it's right next to the gladiator's head, and the gladiator has a metallic helmet, a golden helmet that's reflective. So he's also using materials to strengthen his focal point. And in this case, for me, all of this like is the focal area, right? Like, we have the storytelling here, and we have the emperor sitting here, and this saturation helps with setting up the focal points. This triangle is just to say that there's a conscious decision by the painter to create a relationship between this point, and then it gets us back here. Even this guy is, the way his arm is actually pointing towards these people, it creates a relationship, a triangular relationship between the people, the gladiator, and the emperor in the back. So lighting will highly enhance your narrative and help you depict the relevant mood. And this is from The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford. And the director of photography, again, is Roger Deakins, which always has an amazing way of using light. And this is the intro of the movie, right? And everything is so dark, and they're waiting to do a train robbery. So already you really set the mood to what's going to happen, right? There's some violence that's going to happen. They're going to stop a train to go and rob the passengers. So the way he actually lit this shot is he's perfectly silhouetting the guy. The train is coming from the other side, and he's lighting the guy. So it's really dramatic and almost scary, because he's like a dark silhouette, right? What is this dark silhouette, scary dark silhouette doing here? And it's funny, because if you think about it, the people that are in the train are seeing him from the front, so he's actually lit from the front. But for you as a viewer, as an audience watching the movie, you're just seeing this creepy silhouette with the creepy trees in the back that is so much enhanced by this, this foggy mood and this lighting. The Godfather, again, like, this is a very conventional technique of hiding the person's face with lighting, right? You just use a top lighting, and the eyes will be shadowed, and it makes it look like a skull, because usually when you look at a skull, the eyes are hollow, so they're dark, and it makes it a bit more scary and creepy, if you want. So again, just examples of using light to depict the moods. Another example from Blade Runner, there's no more vegetation in Blade Runner, so instead of seeing farms of crops and plants, we are seeing farms, solar farms, basically, with all these, these solar panels, and we're using the lighting. It's a very gray mood, very foggy, to depict an endless field of plants that have been replaced by something else, which is, very, very moody. So natural light is governed by the sun. So we have lighting categories here that I'd like to talk about. And all of this, so I'll state the reference in a bit, but we have the natural light, which is governed by the sun, the sky, and the moon, right? This is what provides the natural light. It's basically light that comes from nature. And then when it's cloudy, you're still gonna get the same light from the sun, but it's cloudy, so it's gonna affect the light differently. You're gonna have some soft shadows instead of hard shadows, right? It's going to be a bit more moody because it's more foggy. There's more fog. There are more clouds. It's more gray. It's less happy. So all these things will help you set the mood. A last example of my personal image where, the light is coming from the moon. Now, you should note here that usually the light that comes from the moon is not blue. It's more warm. But in this case, I made it blue just because it was a conscious decision, to have like a bluish mood, which you can allow yourself as an artist sometimes to do. And then you have the practical lights, which are lights that have been physically placed in the scene, like these lamps right here. They have been physically placed in the scene, and they can create links between characters, placing a lamp between two characters. They can also justify some sort of lights, like this guy has a rim light here, and it's justified by the practical light that's on his left. which doesn't mean that these practical lights are actually the main light source, because if you look at this guy here, he's getting lit from this lamp, but he isn't actually. If you look at how they shot the scene, they have a lot of extra lights. And this goes to say that whenever you're lighting your scene or your image in 3D or in 2D, you have to learn to let yourself go. And even if we don't have a lamp like this in our scene, it doesn't matter. We can cheat it. We can put a lamp outside of the screen. It doesn't have to be in the camera. Maybe it's outside of the camera, but it's lighting the scene, just to get the result that we want, because we want our character to have form. We want them to have the proper mood. And then you have the dramatic lights. They're used to push the storytelling of the shot. They do not have to be justified on camera in our place off screen, which is exactly what I was saying. So here we have this very dramatic green light. It's a very sickly light. We don't know where it's coming from, right? If there's a sun outside or a moon, it wouldn't really make like such a green light. So we don't really know where it comes from, but we don't care. It's just there, and you as a viewer, you won't stop the movie to say, oh shit, where's this green light coming from? You're just watching the movie, and you're going to be emotionally affected by the light and the mood that you're seeing. Dramatic lights are used to push the storytelling of the shot. However, having a motivation for the light will help make it look natural. So this is what Roger Deakins says, is that he always likes to have some sort of motivation to justify the light, right? He doesn't, which means that you should push it, in my opinion, and try to experiment with what lighting you want. But if you push it to an extent where it's completely unbelievable and not credible, then it will be too much. Objectives of lighting. How do we use lighting? It's one, to direct the viewer's eye. As simple as that. You have a shot, it's going to be in the movie for 2 seconds. In this 2 seconds, you need the viewer to look where he should look and not get lost in the image. To enhance the mood, the atmosphere, and the drama. 3, creating depth. Whenever you have, fog, and if it's lit properly, it's going to create the proper layers for the eye to see and be able to read the image. Conveying time of day and season, so we need to know where we are set if the storytelling requires it. 5, revealing character, personality, and situation. And 6, complementing composition. So the light, again, it's here to complement the composition and to dance with the shapes in order to make a good image. Controlling the light in 3D, 6 options to control the light. Keep it simple. So these are just some parameters that if you have them in front of you and you're struggling with the light, just know that these are the things you need to worry about and nothing else. The position, the rotation of your light source, the softness, is it a hard shadow, a soft shadow? This will also play with the mood. It will play with the form. The exposure, how exposed it is, the color temperature, and the blockers, which sometimes you have a certain light and you want to block the foreground, so you place a blocker in front of the light just to have like a cast shadow in the front or in the back or wherever. So all of these are parameters you can play around with to control your light. And this is my reference, for some of these things. It's a great digital book that you can find online. And the guy who wrote the book is called Chris Brejon. He's French. And he's a lighting artist, not a concept artist, but he did an amazing job of showing a lot of examples from movies and scenes and explaining why they light things in a certain way and what sort of conventional lights you can have. And yeah, guys, I think I went past the time, hopefully not. So thank you for listening. And I don't know, guys, if we have time for questions, I guess. Yeah? So let's do it.
Round of applause.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
So yeah, we are running ever so slightly over time, so I'll probably just take 1 or 2 really quick questions if anyone has any ready. I'll run over quick.
Oh yeah, hi. So I have a question about, it's probably very subjective, but what would you say is like a good ratio between researching and designing, or if it's like a continuous process, like you research something, design a bit, and then continue the research?
So do you mean if you have like a brief and you need to design something, how much time do I spend researching and actually drawing or applying the design?
Yeah.
This really depends on what you're doing, but what I would say is the research is very, very, very important. Because again, if you spend the whole day researching and you found the perfect thing that you're looking for or the perfect reference, then if you already know how to apply things, then your work is basically done, right? You just have to go apply it technically, change some small things maybe, and your work is done. So the research is not to be taken lightly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And one more last question, if anyone has anything they'd like to ask Jan. No? Well, I mean, we are slightly over, so I mean, just once more, please make her welcome, feel welcome, and thank you for that great talk.
Thank you, guys.